I don't either.
And it looks weird when it's 80 degrees outside and you carry a sweater.
Good evening. I'm going to call the special work session to order. We are here at the administration building at a little after 6 p.m. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. We have a little business to do before we start our special work session. I'm going to start with asking the board for a motion. Somebody to make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted and amended.
That motion.
Thank you, Jeremy. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Chris. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Public comments on patron comments. Public comments on agenda items. You think I taught the last day of school, which I did not. So all of you out there, I commend you for being here. Seeing none, we will move on to action items, personnel reports. Mr. Harris.
On the personnel report this evening, making a recommendation for employment for under administrative staff. I'm recommending Kate Charlton as the elementary principal at Eastview Elementary beginning July the 1st. Also recommending Kelly Dungan as the director of the Alternative Learning Center, or Alternative Learning at the Spartan Learning Center, also beginning July 1st. Certified staff recommending Brittany Lunsford as an elementary teacher at Eastview Elementary. And you have a list of teachers that I'm recommending for the summer school that will be at the elementary level for this summer, beginning here early in June. So that's the personnel report.
And there's also a backside too with some high school folks and First Center folks as well, just to make you aware.
Thank you. Okay, I would like someone to make a motion to approve the personnel report as submitted.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mark. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ann. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
And then if I can make a couple of
Yes, please.
introductions. First, Kate Charlton. Take you out of the back row. And as she comes up, recommend now no longer recommendation, but the new principal of Eastview Elementary School. Kate has taught the Fayette County School Corporation for 4 years. She's been extremely involved in multiple committee and leadership opportunities within the district. She obtained her bachelor's degree in elementary education from IU East. Her master's degree in ed leadership was received in 2017 from the University of Indianapolis. Kate was raised in Centerville and has spent most of her educational career in this area. She was an educator in Western Wayne for 7 years prior to coming to Connersville. She lives on a family farm in Centerville, and I think she'll bring many of those family farm values to Eastview as she goes. She is married to husband Chad and has 3 kids who are being very, very good so far. But children ages 5, 4, and 1.
One's out
So,
there. Yeah. You can come in.
I don't think he wants to come.
He's like, no,
so
I'm not
Kate,
coming in.
welcome, and I don't know if there's any
Kelly's-
remarks or anything you'd like to
you.
say to the board?
Yeah, I wrote a speech.
So, okay.
I just wanted to say I'm deeply honored and humbled and incredibly excited to be standing here before you tonight as the new principal of Eastview Elementary School. I want to thank Scott and Kim and Randy and the board, for entrusting in me to serve with the students, the teachers, the staff, and the families of Eastview. And to my husband.
Who's hiding?
Come on out here, Chad.
Busy.
My husband Chad, and my little ones, Elias and Dougie and little Myra here. To my parents, my dad over here. Hold on for a second. my mom over here in the corner, my brother who just came from the field, straight from the field, and his wife and his children. You know, and I'm just so thankful for my entire support system. All my Grandview people, all my Eastview people now, you know. Thank you for believing in me, you know, sincerely from my heart. I appreciate it, thank you.
And now hopefully somebody else is out there in the hallway area, and then we'll come back in here. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Kelly Duncan as the new Director of Alternative Learning at the Spartan Learning Center. She's taught in the Fayette County Schools for 5 years, and for more than a semester, she has served as the interim assistant principal at Connersville High School. She obtained her bachelor's degree in natural resource and environmental science from Ball State University. She completed a transition to teaching certificate through Indiana Wesleyan University. Then her master's degree in educational leadership and supervision was received in 2012 from Ball State University. Kelly was raised in Hagerstown and spent most of her educational career in this area. She completed her first year of teaching in the Rush County schools before moving to Centerville for 4 years and then 5 years at Western Wayne. I believe she's going to do a great job also at the Spartan Learning Center. And her family, her husband Steve is the director of the Career Center, and she has 2 daughters that attend Connersville High School. So,
They're probably on the
welcome,
field,
Kelly.
right? Are they on the field?
So this will be a short speech so you can get to the field and cheer on the Spartans, the daughters, so.
Thank you very much. It was a whirlwind of a year at the high school, as everyone already knows, and making that transition from teacher to part-time admin and to full-time admin, it was very rewarding. I'm excited to continue in an admin and leadership position and keep the lines of communication open between the SLC building and the high school. Having already built a lot of those relationships, hopefully will help things to transition very smoothly. So I'm excited to get started.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
We can take a minute or two. I know some people might want to exit the meeting and
We have an open public board meeting, so all of you are welcome to attend and stay, but if you would like to leave, then.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.
That
sounded good, didn't it?
Oh, Delaney, you want to stay too.
Pardon?
You might stay.
I should listen to
How many years was your husband on the board?
I'm sorry?
How many years was your husband on the board at Western Wayne? Her husband was on the board. I know.
Okay.
See you guys here.
Thank you for those who have stayed. I got a little excited, thinking maybe all the people wanted to stay.
It's an open door meeting, so we have to be careful. Those 2 doors are open.
Yeah, well, just until.
Go ahead and leave it open.
Okay.
I don't want to close.
They're all heading out, they're just.
Okay, well, now we're going to move on to our discussion item for the evening. And we have Gibraltar Design and Skillman Corporation here, so I'm not sure who's taking the floor first.
Go ahead and begin. It is a pleasure for us to be with you again. Thank you for having us. The highlight of my day, I was opening the door as people were coming in, and one of the little ones that was here as a spectator looked at me and gave me a huge raspberry. And I thought, we haven't even spoken yet. She already gave me feedback, but
I didn't think you knew he was a principal, an elementary school principal, and that's what it was a trigger response to elementary school principal, right, Scott?
yeah, she knew. That's right. I guess once you're a principal, you're always a principal. So, thank you again. And want to begin tonight by kind of framing what we plan to cover. Historical timeline, as always, we need to know where we have been, starting in June of 2022, and then projecting through the winter, and then what is ahead this summer and into the fall. I'll always outline our objectives and outcomes. We're going to go over guiding principles, the feasibility options, starting at the elementary level, that framework that we showed you with the base option for 5 schools, and then the base option with improvements as well, we'll cover today. And then scope and budget, which is going to be a very important conversation to see how those two balance out. And then we'll discuss our next steps. This is just a reminder of the commitment that you have done as a board and school leadership. We've done a lot over the last year, from community input meetings to special work sessions to board work sessions to the continuous board meetings that you have. I just want to thank you for your commitment, and it shows that you are wanting to take your time and you want all the information to make sure that we are making the right decisions. And then you can see what we have on our agenda tonight, and then we'll set the stage for what happens in June and July moving forward. Our objectives tonight, just that continued review of the importance of generational life cycle school projects, just that opportunity to really look at your district and the needs, as we've been doing since June of 2022. And then also discuss and review the importance of that scope and budget alignment. And don't want to forget the integrate the learning that we got from the community meeting, the input, the Q&A. There were a lot of great questions, and I believe that's already online with some of the questions that have come. So I'm glad that we are going to be able to integrate that this evening as well. And this feels a little bit like a principal or a teacher where you recite your classroom goals each time, but this is just that reminder that we got to stay centered with what brought us here in the beginning. But we're always looking at value, efficiency, aesthetics, and then a school for the future. Jim, you want to go ahead and jump into the framework?
Nice to see everyone. Feasibility study, options, how that looks. Just keep in mind, this will not be the last time we'll roll up our sleeves and go through discussion of what happens at the buildings, what's affordable, how all that looks, but we got to start somewhere. For us, Skillman and Gibraltar, with Victor and Tim and Mike, myself, Chris, and frankly all of our organizational team members that help, and there's dozens of people that are working on this on your behalf. There's no egos. While it may look like we're emphasizing something, it's not that we're intending to. We felt like school boards appreciate if we get it all on the table. And then you'll start telling us, well, we don't agree with that, we don't like that, more of this, less of that. Hey, what about this? Are we sure we're going to do this? That's all out there, open. Please don't hold anything back. And it's repetitive and iterative. We'll emphasize that again. We're going to go through, when we say feasibility study, it's how do we do it, can we do it, importance, this is harder than this, those types of things, and that's why we do this. It's one of the things in my 30 years of doing this, and Victor and some others could share this as well, used to be the feasibility study would start to bear out, well, this just isn't really feasible. But with enough money, nowadays, you can construct and do just about anything. So it's hard to say if someone asks the question, well, can we do this? Usually the professionals at this end of the room would say yes, but let us go to work and tell you how much it'll cost. So it's very rare that we'd say, that's just not feasible. I bring that up because when we're doing this repetitively, I don't think you want us to be talking about or doing things that you're done and you don't want us to be doing. So you just tell us, even though we could do it, we don't want to do it. So stop talking about it, get it off the list. And so likewise, what that does is allows us to continue to focus our energies where you're directing us. So we don't need conclusions tonight. We don't need responses tonight. Our goal today is to get you started on the I learned this term from Chris, say the spiraling of the information. Before I talked about scaffolding it where we're building it. Well, now that we've built this great scaffold, we need to spiral around it. So we need to kind of get repetitive about it. So let's get started. By the way, those guiding principles, I think those are not only our values at Skillman Gibraltar bring, but it's also the values that you have in terms of getting maximum dollars, long-term thinking, highly functional, and then if we can, we get to some of the needs and aesthetics. So tonight's presentation of feasibility will be focused on how do we get all 5 schools, let's just say up to date with being a modern 15 to 20-year school. How do we just go through the building, get everything done, get it modernized with infrastructure being the focus. And then part 2, later in the presentation, we'll talk about what would be done educationally, programmatically. So after the building's got a good roof and the boilers and the things that make it heat and cool and all that's up to date, what could we do educationally? And we're going to go through all 5 buildings. We might go through them fairly quickly. We can circle back and talk about specific buildings if you wish. And then we'll have some budget numbers for that. And then we have some suggestions on how you as a board might think about what's next, and we can tell you what we're going to be doing next. So as we go through the slides, you'll see there's kind of like a high level. What does it mean when we say base option? It means all those improvements, heating, cooling, and so forth. Estimate it and talk about how to get that dealt with, aligning with the budget, and you can see what it addresses. So you've seen the matrix before. I do think, not too many public here, but I know this is being videotaped, I think, or recorded. It just bears repeating every time we bring this up. Your district has done a remarkable job maintaining and keeping as best as possible up functioning your facilities. And so while there are black boxes there for things that are beyond their useful life, I think we've made this point a couple of times. At some date in your journey for the building, things are worn out then, and there's no more parts, or they need to be replaced because your repetitive repairs far exceed just replacing it and getting it working once and for all. So, but your facilities are very well maintained, and you're clever, frugal, cost conscious in how you go about your business. And we compliment you on that with Daryl and Jimmy and your maintenance team. So these matrix helped us know what you have. And then we did a checklist. So what do we do about it? And that's what the checklist means. And we made this point at the public meeting last week. That this is the action. Like, okay, this starts to create, check these things and get them updated and resolved. So that begins the information that the Skillman Corporation uses to think about estimates and budgets. In addition, we sent them drawings for each building. Anybody want to quickly tell me what this represents and why it is important to everybody?
Square footage.
And why is it important?
Because we have a lot of
That, which means you, what, have to
it.
spend money.
We have money to spend, and you basically spend it budgeted per square foot
Yeah,
of
it
what
can
you
add up
do.
in a hurry. It's expensive to build new, it can be expensive to renovate. You don't want too much of it in space that you don't need, because you don't want to overbuild it, and you don't want to have not enough space to do educational function. And so what we do with the square footage in a building, all this out, is how we assemble budgets for you, for the most part. There's some other estimating details and equipment and so forth, but generally speaking, I share that with you because if you see things like, well, when we think about improving parts of the building, you may say, well, it may come to pass, because you're looking at all-inclusive, it may come to pass that you'll say, well, we maybe need to wait and not do right now these rooms, which adds up to square footage that you spend almost $0 on. So the blue and the color code, it just gives you an idea of how we might refresh the building in these spaces. White areas, and this is as it's communicated to Skillman, areas that maybe don't need a lot of work. Other areas that are colored might mean more intensive work. And we start with these base options, which are the facility checklisted items, whether it's boilers, piping, roofs, those types of things. So this is a look at Eastview Elementary School and the general nature. Here is a look at Everton Elementary School. And again, white areas mean we don't feel like we need to do a lot to it, like almost nothing, unless there's a hidden piping, or if there's piping running through a ceiling that goes from point A to point B, that might be why we do something. And the more intensive work, less intensive work. And then what you're not seeing is line item work. Some of the drawings I saw, there might have been 10, 15, 20 items that Mike and the planning team sent to Skillman. And it's just numbered 1 through 23. It just lists all the different things. Basically, think of it as what we do as architects and engineers and interior designers. We translate what you need to working information that estimators and contractors can put numbers to. And we translate that. What kind of boiler? How big is the boiler? That type of stuff. So we did this at Everton, and we'll just kind of keep going. You can see here is Fayette Central. Again, like white areas, so Mike and Chris and Tim and Victor, with some of your team, we did another walk through the buildings. I think it was the day we met you, or maybe the day before we met you over in Shelbyville. Just walking through again, kind of just think of it as like, Chris, everybody kind of saying, yeah, what would we do in this room? Just kind of double checking, if we're going to do something, what would it be? Paint, carpet, ceilings, lights, whatever. And our lens with this tonight is like a 20-year school, so meaning like if we did something, we would, with good maintenance and things, we wouldn't expect that you'd have to do much to it other than just routine maintenance, which should be a lot easier, by the way, in a newly updated school. So that's our lens.
Just a question or a comment. This doesn't elucidate like the plumbing or the HVAC, because like plumbing would go through the whole building, right? So if there are plumbing issues.
That's in the estimates.
Right, I know it's in the estimates, but there's no way to color code, because
No.
that would really be
That's-
over it would be
Correct.
everything.
So that's why we have like those numbered items. So
Okay.
I would know what number it is. Let's say it's number 12, so plumbing pipes throughout, or
Yeah.
so
Okay.
so that's the piece you're not seeing. It's just, we didn't want to overload you with information.
Right.
But, it's that, it's the step in our professional process where we communicate all the information so that a professional team can estimate what is happening.
Right, okay.
And that's what we're communicating, is the what. Yes?
So if I'm looking at this, are you saying the areas in white would not need?
Well, the areas in white is yes, but the corridors, all the corridors have new finishes, ceilings and things like that. We didn't color code.
So like this
color
one's
code the
Fayette
corridors.
Central, and you're saying that the gym would not need? Okay. And then the areas in, looks bluish purple,
Yes?
is that referencing a light renovation? Because it looks a little different than what I'm seeing, the
Yeah, the restrooms, ADA upgrades and some
okay.
modernization of the restrooms, yes.
Yeah, so I will check. So light blue is like, not, it's, thinking like I'm thinking words, refresh.
I was just making the
paint,
chart
carpets.
matches what I'm seeing here, because it looks like it's a little off in color.
And
And that's
then-
what I was just confirming.
Color looks different because there's a frame around it.
Yes.
So then it makes it look a little bit different.
And that's what's, yeah, it's kind of,
So the orange, so like restrooms are gonna be more expensive, so they're oranges and reds to show you where those are. And then I apologize, yeah, the corridors, we thought it'd be too hard to read the floor plan if we didn't leave the corridors white, but corridors generally, other than a refresh, things are going through the corridor, but there's not a lot of HVAC and plumbing literally in the corridor.
But when you, just for reference, those who went to Shelbyville to look at Loper, when these rooms are blue, it would be a similar finish with new LED lighting, new HVAC with
Yes.
the units that duct the air in instead of those loud units by, at each
And it's
room.
really a case where.
Flooring, cabinetry, desks.
And it's a holistic look. So, obviously that means more dollars per square foot to get there. But that doesn't mean that's what you're gonna do, it's just a place to start the conversation.
And we also, I think we had some conversation that there's some of that work that our folks can do, right, on the refresh?
What I would say is this, right now, I would propose we not try to start saying, well, we'll paint these rooms,
Yeah.
or we'll do this. Think of that as, I almost would say a last resort.
Okay.
But I would say, like, if you see white, it means our intent at Fayette Central is the gym is relatively, other than the things that are broken and not working, like if there's cooling not working, the gym's getting cool, but we're not planning to go in and holistically change the gym at the base option.
And that cost would be pretty extreme with that gym probably to go.
Oh, sure, yeah. So like.
It takes money away from the classrooms.
But month from now, 3 months from now, when you get ready to approve a budget, if it's important that Fayette Central's gym gets a new wood floor, and want painting and a bunch of bleachers, we would want you to be communicating that so we can help together make sure everyone's expectations are aligned with your money. But for now, we just thought, well, from what we saw, it wouldn't, Fayette Central be good without a lot of gym work. And that's what we're trying to express here, but remember, there's a whole nother layer of numbered items that are also not. The next school is.
Can I ask, or just add one thing that's helping me? So the blue area would look new, feel new, and act new, but it's not going to change teaching and learning. If you go into the darker colors, it's a little bit more expensive renovation, like the red and orange. It changes the function of that space, which changes the way it behaves, because you can get kids through a little bit quicker, makes it more efficient, has new, toilets, new partitions, new sinks, all that type of thing. So that to me, it doesn't change necessarily teaching and learning with this, base model, but you are getting the feel of a new building.
Yeah, and to add to that, for example, these restrooms are your existing restrooms. There are some schools where the learning environment includes new restrooms, but none of these base options provide new restrooms. And we walked around some of these buildings and where kids are lining up to use the restrooms. I don't know how long they're in the hallway to use the restroom. So updating, adding new restrooms would be in the improvement option that you'd see. So these aren't adding restrooms, they're just making the ones you have
More
better.
efficient.
Yeah.
And then additionally, this is not changing the size of the classroom, it's just
Right.
Exactly.
refreshing the classroom. per
It's
se.
just to fix what you got.
Yeah, okay.
Are we looking at any parking lots and/or drop-offs?
Only, and we'll let Victor and Skillman talk to this, appreciate the question. Right now, the answer is no, we're not gonna holistically go and do, unless you would direct us to add costs, we're not gonna go out and holistically change site items. I would encourage us all that when we get ready to approve a budget and a bond and keep moving, that we make sure we're okay not doing some site work, or if we put site work in, what are we gonna take out? Okay, so the next thing we did is we took all of that information, and with the help of our partners in Skillman Corporation, we took the checklist and then created what we think you would appreciate as a preliminary budget. So I'll let Tim and Victor kind of talk through how that's created and what you're looking at.
Thank you, Jim. Go back to Well, I want to have a conversation about something. If you all remember, I don't know if this is a middle school or a high school, the difference between accuracy and precision. You all remember that conversation? So some of these numbers suggest a level of precision, which is not what we want you to come away from. What we want you to come away from is a level of accuracy. And the reason I say that is that our experience gets us accurate to predicting where we will end. But when you see a number that's $5,813,068, that suggests a level of precision that I don't want you to come away with. That suggests we have quantified this right down to the dollar. That's not what that means. What it means is that by using our database, by taking information we know from Gibraltar, experience, applying certain contingencies, that when you multiply certain variables, you end up with a finite number. And rather than rounding that number up or rounding that number down, we leave it as that number. So again, we feel that we're accurate with the numbers, but the precision of the numbers is really a reflection of a much more conceptual. Think of it, that we will use the analogy 30,000 feet. We're looking at the plane at 30,000 feet on numbers here. So, but we think we're accurate in terms of what we're predicting. So for the presentation, what you see is that we've taken the matrix that it sort of checks the box of what work applies to each school, and then we've taken the category of that work and put a number across the right-hand column. So, for example, you'll see that Eastview and Frazee both have a need to address the heating plant boilers. The other three schools do not have an immediate need for that. So that $262,965 represents our estimate for the cost to address the heating plant in those two buildings. That's the total. Now, we have an individual number for both buildings, but we didn't want to overwhelm you with numbers this evening. And then, so if you take that same logic for cooling plant, for air distribution, for hydraulic piping, temperature controls, you see that we have HVAC numbers, you see that we have a collection of plumbing numbers, you see they have electrical numbers and technologies included in that as well. So all those numbers along the right-hand column represents the total value of each of those categories for the 5 schools. I want to pause there because that reflects the mechanical, electrical, plumbing components of the building based on this matrix here. When we went to the architectural, then we referred to the drawings, the floor plans, the areas that would receive finishes. So you see a major component there, finish replacement, 6,000, I can't read it from here, 386,771, so almost $6.9 million. That is a collection and an average of cost that reflects the flooring, the walls, the ceilings. It reflects new writing services, replacement of cabinetry. So everything you sort of feel and touch in a room is addressed with that upgrade. We've put a specific line item just for Fayette Central, the next one, for window replacement. So of the 5 schools, Fayette Central needs to have a window replacement. My observation is that the building envelope, the exterior of the buildings are all in really nice condition. So they didn't rise to the level of immediate need that these other items have. The next item is that restroom renovation. Unlike the example I gave of where we're replacing the finishes, in the restrooms, we're literally tearing walls down and we're cutting up slabs, we're reconfiguring that. So this
Is that underneath the red, what you just pulled up, the restroom? Where's restroom?
Restroom, did they get cut off?
Yeah.
It's on the slide before, I think.
Just roll it, Chris.
Then go to the second one.
There you go.
There,
Did they get
okay.
cut off? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So for those 5 buildings, there's $2 million of basically, if you recall at Loper, those that went to Loper, we literally went in and the 4 walls of that block, everything inside got replaced. So that is a much, what we call heavy renovation, as opposed to just the walls staying, you're replacing all the finishes. So there's $2 million of restroom updates and replacement in this baseline.
And Victor, if I remember from Loper, we looked at a restroom area that was being redone. That, it's not just that you're getting new fixtures and new tile, it's the flow. It's the flow of students.
Yes.
Because that seems, in addressing, I think it was Chris said, was in an elementary and the kids are lined up in the hallway. And I know when my kids went to Everton, that was always a complaint. That was only one set of restrooms at Everton. But I I think that's an important piece for the public to understand. It's not just fixtures. It's going to get kids back into the classroom for learning and make that restroom time
Leslie,
less.
I've actually quantified that. It's
Okay.
a third of the time. You have a third of your students that are with you in the hallway. You have a third that are using the restroom. You have a third that are in the wash stations in the corridor in your visible side as you're supervising as they're washing their hands. So they go in and out so much quicker. Supervision so much easier. You're not having to go in, knock, and say, "Are you guys done?" Or are there open stalls? And then someone else goes in. It's like this. Like I said, a third of the time you can get a classroom through.
Yeah,
So
I think
Victor,
that's-
this would be like they were doing at Loper where the wash stations are outside of
Yes,
the
sir.
toilet area, so kids go in, do their business, come out and wash with us, because that's new designs and new schools.
Yeah, boys and
It's
girls,
so much more
just
efficient.
for those in the audience, what we saw is there's a little opening, there's a bank of sinks, and then two separate sides. So boys and girls go in separate sides, but they're all washing their hands in the same place.
The best part, speaking from a principal, is there's no more horseplay in the restrooms. They have to wash their hands out in the hallway.
He's happy.
I wouldn't say no more, no more, but it's greatly decreased without having the availability of throwing water at one another.
Chris and I were both in building with that design, and it was so much more efficient with getting students in and out. Huge.
Well, and there's a whole practical, again, this sort of generational life cycle. A lot of these restrooms are older, is older than me, and you see what condition I'm in. But, we are going under and taking piping from under the ground that's been there for 60 years. And so it's a life cycle replacement of that plumbing. So that's what we're trying to capture in those dollars, is those improvements. Then the last line item on this slide is our site work. And you asked us, this is a strategic move. We may have hit the mark, we may have not, but of the 5 buildings, Fayette Central has issues in terms of safety. It has all that parking along the side of the road, and I personally backed out. I can appreciate the issue there. So we chose to make baseline, creating some more parking and then eliminating the parking along the road there. So out of all the baselines, that one has the significant amount of site work. There's very little site work beyond that. So it's sort of unique. Fayette Central has the windows and the site work, where the other 4 buildings do not. So if you want to go to the next slide, then I think we just blew that up to see, and you see, I should have mentioned that if you didn't know this, Everton is the smallest elementary at a roughly 35,000 square feet. Fayette Central is roughly the largest building at almost 54,000 square feet. And the other 3 buildings are roughly 44,000 square feet. So size makes a difference. Jim just illustrated square footage. So we have more square footage of finishes, more square footage for mechanical, and that reflects a lot in the variation of the work, probably more than the variation in the type of work. Because you see there's a lot of checks on that matrix there.
And I think, I'm gonna add to this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is to bring them up to a base option of all the buildings equally at that point.
That is correct. And what I would describe as a 25-year renovation. So all new finishes and all new systems. And we see systems running for 25 to 30 years. So and we are taking a comprehensive look at those systems so that you would have minimal improvements for the next 20 years based on this approach. We're building ourselves an option list here, and so you see that 5-school base option. The previous slide did not include a critical budgeting item, and that is soft costs. We want you to see the raw construction costs because that ultimately is the bricks and mortar that we're estimating. Whatever we decide is the bricks and mortar component of your project, we will then apply a soft cost factor to that. And soft cost covers professional design fees, construction management fees. It's going to cover a contingency. When you're working in buildings that are 50, 60 years old, you need to set aside dollars for what is hidden between the walls or hidden under the slab. And then, of course, things like cost of finance and other smaller costs that it takes to deliver a project. And we normally have seen, if there is an average project, an average of about 25%. So until we get farther along in the budgeting, we are going to recommend a 25% factor be added on to whatever bricks and mortar is part of your project.
Victor, does that also include like loose furnishings?
Yes, it does, thank you. Loose furnishings and what we would call loose technology. So typically our technology has the built-in components, but if you were to choose to, sometimes the monitors are part of loose technology, sometimes various servers and other components of technology that are sort of fixed in place. That would be part of that soft cost.
Just to clarify, with Fayette Central, we know that there's the water issue with the well capacity, and so this doesn't include running water out there or taking care of the sewer lines that run into town, right? I just want to be clear, I didn't see it on there, so.
It is not. We've taken that in account in considering it for some other options where you have to do it, but in this option, we've not.
Okay. I didn't see it, so I wanted to be sure.
Okay, we're now moving towards the next part of this, which would be that 5 elementary base option, which is everything that you're going to see forward is that included, everything that we've talked about up to this point, but also includes some improvement options based on staff survey, based on principal input, when we're talking about the configuration of the front office, how the programming that's in the front office, and then small group instruction, other features of the building STEM, those items are included in this option as well. So think of everything that we've talked about so far would be included and what you will see now.
So when we build this and communicate it to Skillman and start to create the budgeting, building this budget, we take the same checklist and say we're going to do all these things. And then we use this new checklist, which you had seen before, which are the learning environments, and same approach to make programming better, learning opportunities better for any of those educational need reasons. We started to create a checklist. The yellow was simply using the eyes of impact for learning, bang for your buck, or where might we start to think these would be the most important things. They're not reflected in estimates in this regard. We estimated everything that's on this checklist. So we took a holistic approach, but we figured you might want us to go back to this slide later and say, well, can you talk a little bit about why certain things in our eyes stood out as wanting to be addressed first, second, or third versus other things. But in the end, you all as a school board would, if you choose to do some learning environment changes and spend those dollars, you'd be directing us to say, spend money here or here. The other thing about learning environments is there is sort of an integrated or overlap. Like while we're doing this, the restrooms would be a great example. If we are going to decide to update the restrooms, we should take a hard look at the margin of additional dollar needed to get them functionally the way Chris and Scott talked about. Or if we're going to go into certain rooms, not all the rooms, but certain rooms are going to have very invasive work, and just for a few more dollars we can reconfigure it to make it better educationally, we'd want to look at that. So these two different big buckets of budget management mode are not mutually and entirely exclusive from one another. But for the purposes of tonight, it would be appreciated if we did separate them, as if you could say, do this big group, but don't do this big group. So we did the same exercise, and you've seen some of these drawings before. let me just kind of go a little slower. So now, if you notice, there's a lot more red, a lot more orange, a lot more work being done. There's still some white, which means when we're all done, we don't know that these rooms need to have extensive work done. They're in good shape. It could be because of what we saw and what it's used for. And it could be because you did some work. Again, it's not a perfect drawing, but it's a great place to have a conversation. Some functional learning opportunities require additions and new space being added to the building. Other space is done by more extensively changing what's already under the roof. And so we take our school planning expertise, create a building, essentially the same student population, but we take the input that Chris mentioned we gathered for STEM, media center, library, whatever, and make those improvements. So this is what that looks like at Eastview Elementary. If you like to read bullet points, that's why we put some of those on the right. So we're not trying to turn you into school planners. Yes, we want to expand the office. We got to do some work at the kitchen. We're going to renovate and update certain other things. So you can see like the restrooms we talked about. And that's that judgment where you think, well, if we're going to do restrooms, we're going to change the configuration. So this is a look at Eastview. Here's a look at Everton. Some plans for the buildings have more white, some have less, meaning just basically what we saw. When we look at these...
Sorry, that we like to do is the programming that we were implementing at one school, you'll see a consistency across the board. So back to the very beginning, no matter your address, you have the same learning opportunities and experiences.
Except for some buildings will have more special ed resources than the other
Some
buildings.
district, yes, special ed programming at certain schools versus others, but
That's
yeah.
the difference.
Now, this approach, when we have building additions, does trigger more site work. The question that was asked earlier about what are we doing about the site. When you start to do this work, probably the easiest way to say it is, you're not just going to plop down a building addition and not deal with the grades and the sidewalks around the building if you need to adjust the parking lot and restripe it. So things, they start to get connected and you have to add those costs to make it all done. But it is true, the view is the 20-25 year school, meaning like this is new, we go away for 20 years and you simply maintain and operate the building. Next slide is Fayette Central. A lot more blue to kind of update it, but you can see some purposeful functional changes for learning opportunity. Level it out, all schools have the same learning opportunities.
You can see in this one, we do get into the gym, but is there a historical registry involved in that?
Not aware.
I'm joking, but it is, yeah.
It's the needle architecture.
And when you're looking at these, and I'll use the gym as an example, if you don't see like orange attached to the gym, know that the gym's not getting any bigger. Because orange and red means like expansion. So if you don't see, maybe if we go back, I'm hesitant to ask if we can go back, because I haven't watched how Chris has operated this.
Randy used to be
I
a
love you,
teacher.
Chris.
Randy used to be a
Randy
teacher.
taught him. So, but just, if you look at the top of this drawing plan and you see the red, those are additions. So if you're looking at this later, but then you can see the key code down below. But and those are done because we're using current space under roof for a different purpose. So we take the classroom, turn it into a better office area, but the classroom's still needed, so we got to add it on. And so that's the school planning piece to that. And that's a very common, clever, cost-effective approach. Okay. In Frazee, you can see the same type of thinking that goes into it.
So on any of these, if you, like I saw it at Fayette Central and I see it here in Frazee, where it looks like it's classrooms, which was blue in the previous on the base options, those are classrooms that need to be bigger necessarily, or is it a classroom is going to be reverted to a STEM room or something?
So what you see here on the blue, and so if you look at the right side, you see a series of classrooms. So we're just going to go in and refer refresh those. So that's essentially what the base option did.
Right, right.
But the orange and the blues are where we're taking rooms and maybe changing their purposes to help get those learning opportunities that are bullet pointed on the right side resolved. So yes, so like we need a new STEM room, and what I would say for a school board, like if they use the term manageable doses, now is not a good time that we think to go through and try and design the floor plan, if you will. We got good input from staff. We got our arms locked around it, so we're giving you the holistic view. There may come a time, and we'll show you at the end of this presentation, a district that had to go back and say, we're only doing STEM. And they left behind learning improvements in the media center and some other places. But first, let's start with, get it all done. This is what it looks like, because you're going to ask, how much is all that going to cost? And Victor's going to tell you here in about 2 minutes.
So it looks like, at least in the first 3 schools, all the offices have something expanded. Is that just from knowledge of elementary schools, are our offices lacking because they're smaller? Are there things that you can't do in those offices?
Lacking in 2 ways. One would be student support, so there's lots of students that will visit your office for whether it's proactive or reactive support for students, so not having that space for them. Also, when students are coming in, it's usually kind of in a more common area, so there might be a parent that's registering, their child new to the school, but then also you have a child who is sad and upset because they have a substitute that day and the principal is trying to comfort them. So there's not that privacy for them. And then in addition to that, conference rooms. So there either isn't a conference room or the conference room is located in a place where you're walking the parents and the visitors deep into the building or down the hallway to a conference versus having it in a private area in the office.
And you did say these improvements are based on staff and principal, as well as your staff's,
Yes.
feedback
Collective
as to what's needed. Okay. Thank you.
So as we finish on these plans, great question, dialogue, answers. This may not be the final plan. So maybe once you say do these things but don't do these, we may come back and say, well, given that. So in some ways you could almost look at this as a master plan. So no variables changed. 10 years from now, somebody may pick this up and say, well, let's finally do this room and pick a color and say, let's do it. And that's if the board determines that there's not enough money to do everything. So it's like a master plan, feasibility study master plan. Other times, we find ourselves coming back saying, if these 3 things are no longer considered, here's a different way to look at it, meaning solve the problems and get the solutions done, which deviate from this master plan. But mostly it's because it saves money. Or second, realistically, the things that aren't getting done might never get done. So therefore, let's just kind of put them aside and solve the current 10-year needs, 15 needs. So, but this information again was passed over to Skillman, and they can talk to you about the budget.
So, thank you, Jim. We took a very similar approach that we did in terms of, we, through our historical data, understand, just like the restroom remodeling, sort of got what kind of dollars that takes per square foot or per restroom. We also have experience in what does a classroom addition cost, so we can quantify. So as you can imagine, different spaces in a building have different costs per square foot for each one. Corridor space is probably the cheapest square footage you could build. Restroom space is probably, or kitchen space, are probably the most expensive. square footage is. So taking some of that knowledge and then overlaying it with the areas and the sizes in which Gibraltar's shown on the floor plans, we started to build a cost for, again, additions, heavy renovations, what we call sort of medium renovations, and then we also overlaid some additional light renovations in things like, you may be changing the function of the room, so it may require more costs than just putting it back the way it is now. So if you're changing, if the room is a classroom now, and then it's a STEM room, that's going to require additional costs to create that new function. So we've tried to capture that functional change, even though you're not necessarily moving walls or you're doing very minimal modification of the walls. So as you see, we took the same approach in terms of each school. We quantified, and that ranged, anywhere from $3 million to $4.5 million for that. I'm going to say we did the minimum from the perspective of site. If you noticed, some of those additions are out in the lawn, and that's going to take a lot less cost than if they're into a parking lot, where we may have to reconfigure the parking lot or modify the parking lot. But, for example, we did not build a new playground because we expanded an elementary school. So we only did the minimum site work required to modify that. And of course, I'll repeat what Jim said, the costs that you see here are on top of the costs that are already developed in the baseline. So in the case of Eastview, we're talking about an additional $4.6 million to address all of these functional programmatic needs on top of the dollars that we had estimated in the baseline. So as you can see, moving from left to right there, now you're looking at $10 million for Eastview, and of course it adds up quickly to the point where we're looking at, over $60 million worth of work if you did everything that is being proposed there and you did it all at one time as a project.
And that's not happening.
Although, like you talked about when we went to Loper, now they did theirs over so many years, I forget. Was it a 3-year?
They definitely did it in 2 phases where they expanded their cafeteria, expanded their gym, expanded their front office area.
Right.
And they did that in the first phase. The second phase was coming back, and it was longer.
There was a big difference. There was 15 or 20 years difference in those.
Oh, okay.
So they did work in 2000, a major project in 2000.
The office.
That's why we weren't coming back and making any major additions or renovations.
Right.
But they had not touched, in 2000, they didn't touch the restrooms at all. So that's why they became part of this project.
Well, and while we haven't discussed where the money comes from, just hearing you say, you can set aside some of this stuff for a later time when other debt comes off and we can incur more debt, and we say we want to do this project at that time. So that's why this is valuable information, like Jim said, the master plan. Not saying we may say we can't do that now, but that's on our radar to do at this point in time, 5 years from now, when more debt comes off and we can accrue more debt.
What I like about this team and this process, though, is that whatever does go now is something that's part of a master plan that you wouldn't undo later on in that next round.
Right.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel when we have the availability for more funds. We already have a plan in place then to give us an idea of where we want to go.
What a great segue to talk about scope and budget and how that works.
Okay, so sharing with you now a little bit of a way to view this and for us to keep moving forward. What can we do? What should we do? How might this work? So first of all, at the very bottom, I think I used this for a little bit of humor. This is a manipulative, I think I learned in elementary learning. I learned what the word iterative means, so it's repetitive, like you go through it multiple times. So the whole arrival it was iterative. Another way to say it, which superintendent used one time, I'm not sure why, I think he used it because the way analogy said, Jim, it's like flying around the airport in the airplane, but fuel is going to run out, and so we need to come in for a landing. And I think it was his way to say, at some point, me as superintendent and the board need to come in for a landing. We can't keep circling.
Right.
But right now, let's circle. My vote. Let's just study this, talk about it. So you're basically, as a school board, with our help, and we absolutely appreciate the task at hand, maybe the enormity of it for some of you, but it can be done. It can be done. You can dramatically improve the learning environments for your elementary learners. And it'll be a balance of this is what we can spend and what we get for our money. And this is the scope. Scope for us means like this is what we'll do. And we want to balance those. And alignment really means like those two match to the best of your judgment that you want to move forward with. We don't stop until you feel like, yes, that's what we need to do. And this is what we can afford to do, and those two match, so now we can go forward. There'll be some hard decisions, there'll be some easy decisions that you'll go through. You'll quickly say, we'll do these things, and then you'll start getting to the things that get harder, typically, is what I find. It's human nature to say, well, these are all the things that we just know we should do, and then you get in, and that's why we're all here. You have educators with years of experience, you have great financial leadership, you have design professionals, construction professionals who can get any question answered for you. And if we don't have it, when you ask us at that moment, we go get it for you and bring it back to you. So the process is that iterative, balanced, circling the runway, come in for a landing. Some scopes are driven by priorities, like we just can't let this go on anymore. And you've heard some of that, like when you first talked about facility things that are just, how could you not fix that? Because it's going to be an emergency later, and you can see it coming, it's a black box. Other things, I think, might be adjusted. There are some things that ought not be done in isolation of one another. An example would be if you try to solve your budget need by, on your own, saying, well, I'm going to do this row, and this row. What I would ask is let the professional team go back and estimate it a second time, because there's electrical work involved with HVAC work, because we have electricity powering fans and things. And so let us do that. Chris, being hearing the behind-the-scenes conversations, said, yeah, that would be like going to a restaurant, ordering, asking for the recipe, and then telling the chef, hey, a little bit less salt, I want some more vinegar here. Let us do, you tell us what you want, how you want it to taste, we'll go make it and bring back estimate again. So let us keep working that for you. Could we save money by doing this? Let us go work on that. I say that only because when numbers are revealed, there are some very precocious people who want to just go in and say, well, I can solve this, and they just start adding up numbers and say, here's the solution, because they added up all the numbers. It's not, what you see tonight doesn't work that simply. And then there is a way to focus dollars, right? So I think at one point we made that example, like if you just went through and said, let's just fix all the boilers and chillers in the whole district. You get some, I call it bundling or economies of scale. Let's do all the restrooms, because it's this, Skillman would tell you, it's the same trades and the same people, so if you do them on all the schools, you're going to drive the cost down. So there is some focus dollar results to get more work done. And then you talked about the future forward thinking, like, well, hey, if we do these things now, then maybe we do these things later. So those are just some perspectives. I had someone else share with me, It's like, first you put your glasses on and say, well, what could we do later? And you look at what you're seeing and start saying, these are things we could do later with that set of glasses. You can put another set of glasses on and say, we just can't not do these things. So it's the opposite, let's make sure we do get these things done. Sometimes I hear people call them habit holes, like no matter what we do, can we please get all the restrooms fixed? And so that's a way to look at the budget and how we can help as a team balance that and align it. Future meetings, we can talk about your capacity of budget and so forth. It also helps too because what I've seen successfully done is you have, this is what we can do for X dollars, this is what we can do for a little more dollar, and then here's a list that what we really want to do, and then there's always a list, as I think we've said numerous times, there's always a list of what you just can't afford. So the last thing I want to do tonight, and then make sure you have a chance to ask us any questions tonight that'll help you continue to study this and talk about this. We thought we'd show you a couple of, I'll call them case studies, like what have other districts done? Because you're not alone, every district has to get this aligned, right? So this is a district that had an elementary school, and you can see on the right, like they absolutely, like they're having hold, no matter what we do, we're fixing the HVAC. It's too humid, it's in the summer and spring, and early, and then it's too cold in the winter. Remember I made the comment about the noisy unit ventilators and how it's hard to learn because these things are humming like a bad hotel room, PTAC unit in the wall. So they wanted that done. They really wanted STEM. So that's a learning environment. Now, the first one I gave you is like a facility need, right? The other thing they really wanted was something from their learning environment. They wanted STEM. So they picked that. They also were behind in their main office areas. That is, I think, Scott, Chris, generally speaking, if the school wasn't done in the last 7 or 8 years, it's out of date with student needs. And it's just one of those things that we're thankful schools do, which is address the needs of a whole child. So this district in the front, the bottom left, kind of, I wish I had a laser, well, laser wouldn't work on the monitor, but where you see that heavy scope, that was the main office change. So the STEM is that room, yeah, thank you, Chris. So like STEM is the room in the middle. And actually what they did is pretty clever. They took an art room and said, well, we don't teach art in this building every period of the day, so let's create a STEM room as well, and they rotate the kids through art and STEM. It's a little bigger room than what an art room would need to be, but it can serve that function. And then the main offices, you know how those look when you change them. You have a secure entrance, there's a conference room and all that. And then the blue represents the classrooms. So if we change that to look in the room, this is just one classroom. In the bottom right, you see underneath the window in the before picture, that horizontal noisy unit that's at the end of life. And then you can see the lights and the ceiling and the color. And what we did in the big picture is we removed the horizontal unit that was noisy and not working. We put in a new vertical unit ventilator. So that's, for some of you that if you haven't seen them before, that's what they look like. They're a packaged unit. They do the heating and cooling in the room. It receives cold water and hot water, 4-pipe system to control humidity. And so the chilled water and hot water go into the unit, blows across the air fan, and the fan then blows the air out. What they wanted was something better than the air just blowing out at the top of the unit. So differently, on the horizontal units, you know how you have that register, and you put your hand over it, it's like, oh, the air coming out. Well, with new units, you can get better airflow if you go to the next step, and there's like 2 levels. One way is you just put a register at the top of the vertical unit. So Chris, go to the left. Which would be no different than putting it at the top of the horizontal unit. You can imagine it doesn't blow air very easily across the room. The middle level is what they could afford. And you can see they didn't even change the ceilings. They just could not spend that money, they didn't have it. So they put a horizontal round duct, and then we put registers in the duct to let the air blow, think of it like across the room. And then it blows and it mixes down below, and then you can't see it, but there'd be a register to pull the air in. The top level, or like the more, the final version, is that duct would be above the ceiling and lights, and they would go ahead and replace the ceiling and lights at that point. The whole ceiling and the whole lighting. So they tear the ceiling and light down, put the ductwork in, put the ceiling and lights new back up, and the ductwork is hidden. What that does is registers can be pulled out into the middle of the room. So instead of just coming from one wall, the duct feeds it. So, so if I'm going just to emphasize, so again, one way is to, you put the unit in regardless. And by the way, it's by the window on purpose because that's where the outdoor opening was, right? So we want to pull in fresh air. So there's a reason why you put it in a certain place. And then one way is to do a duct across the room and let the air blow across the room, if this is the room. Another way is just tear the ceiling and lights down and put the ductwork above the ceiling and light. So when we work with Skillman, keep in mind, they're thinking, okay, what's the maximum, like how's this done? So it'd be ceiling lights done, ductwork gets put in. But you may say, you know what? We're going to do it like we see here at Warren. Let's put a duct across the room and do it that way, and let's not replace the ceiling and lights right now.
And because they made those decisions, they were able to get that new STEM room, be able to reconfigure the main office and do those things, because that's what that school system prioritized in this specific case.
And you can see they didn't even paint the room. They looked the same. Same carpet, same everything. Different school, Skillman and Gibraltar worked on. This is Fairview Elementary. They, their approach was, while they wanted to do some work in the classrooms, they had already done the vertical unit ventilators. So somebody was talking about, well, this school district did this before, so they didn't have to do it this time. They left, from what I recall, they left like 30-year-old cabinetry and things on the window wall. So when you walk in the room, if the first thing you look at is the cabinetry, you're like, you didn't do any work in this room. No, we did. We upgraded some finishes. We put a fresh coat of paint in the rooms, replaced most of the room's flooring, but they left behind all the casework, because casework gets real expensive real fast. And I'm trying to remember, like, the conversation might have gone like this. Well, at the end of the day, they're putting all this stuff on it and in it, and so there's only little pieces of the old cabinetry visible. Sure, in the summer, if you go in and all the things are empty, you're like, oh my gosh, there's old cabinetry in here, but when you put all the clutter in there, it kind of just went away. And so they just decided to leave it because it wasn't broken. It didn't look great, but it wasn't broken in the state of disrepair. And it doesn't even color match. Like, I just said, well, let's pick a nice carpet, put some nice paint on the walls, but if the cabinetry's old and bright red, but we wanted brown carpet, then that's okay. So, but if we go back, so what was important to them, though, is the public corridors, the main entry. So this is a community that does a lot of community service. People are in and out of this building like on weekends, and it's right next to the park in the community. So that front, all that orange you see there had to be totally rethought because it just was horrendous for them. So we reconfigured all of that, and then because of all the things that are happening, they wanted all the corridors changed. So they wanted people who were, because the gym is the top big box you see there, but the people will come in at the front of the building, down at the bottom, and they will walk through the hallway. You know, the classroom doors are locked, but they'll walk down to the gym. And they just did not want the community to be walking through horrific-looking corridors in what looked like a 40-year-old corridor. And you'll see a picture that is part of that. But in the middle of the building, they left the cafeteria alone. It's probably 30 years old. It's got old colors and old everything. They left the library alone. They left the gym alone. So let's go to the next slide. So here is like a classroom refresh with fresh paint, change the marker boards. You can see the technology on the walls and those types of things. So bottom right is the original classroom. And then you see on the left what a new looks like. And you see the hint of like the 1960s yellow colored casework in the corner there. But you know, hey. And they left some old closets in the room and stuff, but it's kind of a nice refresh, you know, fresh coat of paint with the technology, new hallway, new flooring. And then the next slide for the same school, do you see the blue on the existing? So that was actually carpet. It was a time, I know, Mike used to think it was a great idea 30 years ago. I'm going to throw him under the bus. Somebody gets in their mind, some architect or some school person says, hey, let's just put carpet on these walls to hide whatever, you know, old. But man, after 30 years, that carpet, like I didn't want to touch it. I was like, okay, I'm not touching carpet walking down the hall, you little kids. So you can see like when if you look at the lower right, like, you know, for a district that's trying to pick up the image of the school and have this heavily community use school look and feel fresh, you can see why they changed the corridors. And so that's the fresh looking corridor, but then the next slide will show you, that's their cafeteria. It's looked that way for the last 25 years. So it just, you know, and so that, hopefully those two examples show, like, if you are trying to say, well, 5 schools, what are we going to do to all 5 schools? That's how you start to do it. You just start to put the pieces together and decide, you know, what are we, and I felt like for as we talked as a team, seeing like one approach, classrooms with the HAC, and then a different approach saying, let's get the public area done. And it could be that in your district, you'll decide each building has a different thematic approach. Like what you might want to do in each building might be different. Or you might say, let's do this across all the buildings, the same work across all the buildings. So that, I think, brings us back to the budget alignment. Christian, kind of bring us in for a landing tonight.
I just always do this, almost like it was a lesson. I want to make sure that we covered everything that we said we were going to cover today. And then next steps, proceed as directed on additional elementary feasibility options for exploration and estimating. So June school board work session to be determined. And so we'll let you guys drive what you would like us to do next. And then also future community meeting to be determined again as directed.
I hope this answers a lot of the questions about money that were very prevalent at the public meeting. People were like, how much is this going to cost? And even with these kinds of estimates, I think that will be very helpful in understanding why we have to take the time that we have to take to go through this whole process. Because we're not going to have $61 million to spend. We would like that. But I think that will help the public understand the complexity of the situation and the kinds of decisions we have to make. And I hope that when they look to see the figures that have been projected here, that they understand why we have to be incredibly careful, because we just don't have all the money that we would like to do what we want to do.
So I think for this team, next step, what would you like to see in the next presentation? Where do we want them to continue working on the 5-school option? Are there any thoughts now that help them take some things away from this, or?
One thing I would like would be for Daryl and Jimmy to be here and talk about the number of man hours in the various buildings in terms of, you know, the work that they've been doing and where, from their perspective, you know, they're just putting incredible man hours in, and it's obviously a more dire need than something else. I mean, one thought I had was, oh, should we go look, you know, should the board take a tour of some of the elementaries and point out, this is what we're talking about when we talked about expanding, like this is where the office might need to be expanded, and this is why there's problems, and you know, maybe the principal would be there, or I mean, Scott and Kim could do it too, but just So the principal's here meeting with a child, somebody's coming in here. I mean, you know, I saw some nods from Stephanie just acknowledging, yeah, those logistics in the office are kind of tough. And so I know for me, I kind of want to know building by building. Yes, I'd like all the buildings to be upgraded, we all would. But like you said, the needs are slightly different. Yes, the plumbing's a problem, HVAC is a problem, or the cooling, heating in the classrooms. I'm guessing some classrooms and some buildings are worse than others in terms of that. I think that would help me to be able to say, oh yeah, this is definitely an issue, we gotta do this. And I think the other thing that I know that Randy was gonna be finding out some of the bond pricing and where we are. I don't know when that information comes out, but that's gonna be helpful for us too, to know what we have.
And he has a little info I think he was going to
Okay.
share if you want to hear.
Yeah.
He talked with Jane Herndon, and do you want to share briefly what?
I'll say briefly, I don't bring any good news. We had a preliminary meeting a week ago. They gave me some numbers just this morning. First off, in the short term, as we've talked about, we did a GEO bond this year, approximately $1 million. We could do a GEO bond next year and the year following, again, approximately $1 million a year. To get us through to 2016 is really when the big, that's when the middle school drops off.
26.
Yeah, is that what you
You
said?
said 2016.
You're-
Oh, no, 26. Yeah.
It's a gift that-
26.
It's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, so that drops off then. They based some preliminary projections on, and I'm gonna take the money the opposite way, is kind of where they take the building, from the standpoint of, the building as Victor talked about, was, whatever it was, figuring the 25% in for soft costs, so you took the brick and mortar of, what was it, $30 million, and you added soft costs of 7 to come up with 37 million. The bonding goes the opposite direction. If we wait until 2026, we would be able to bring in about $29 million, but when you look at all of the fees that go along with that, that's going to bring in about $27 million of real dollars. So when we look at the 5-school option, even doing the base renovations, and we look at, and realize all of that is under the presumption of keeping the tax rate flat, which is approximately 30 cents per hundred. So that's keeping the tax rate flat. If we change any of those parameters, such as, and they're also basing it right now, putting a little cushion in there of a bond rate of 6%, because they're seeing bond rates increasing. So, if bond rates decrease, then we could get more money. If bond rates go up higher than that, then it'd be less money. And also that's keeping that at 30 cents. So the question would be whether the board wants to, the board would be able to raise taxes without going to a referendum slightly. I mean, to go way out there, then it would take a referendum. And I don't have the figures in there to tell you exactly how much that is, but the approximately $29 million, which becomes 27 million real dollars, would be keeping the tax rate flat as it is today at 30 cents. So.
I am glad you shared that though, because some of it wasn't stated at the information meeting, but the buzz out there, various sources, I think folks get confused. They hear this and they say, well, you're going to do all this work, you're going to raise our taxes. So I'm glad you shared that doesn't change the tax rate.
Those figures are with no tax, keeping the tax rate flat. I mean, yes, it could raise tax. I mean, to raise taxes would bring more in, but that raises taxes.
Right.
And we already have fairly high taxes. Especially look at the city combined with the people paying.
So without budget of that high 20s per se, I guess it would, going back to them, would be what could we do with that, whether we're we know we can't do all 5, even for the base option.
Well, it's not that we can't do all 5, we can't do everything at all 5.
We have to cut.
We have to,
So I
You can
think we
still
need
do
to
all
look at
5, but you
options
just have to-
that nobody wants to hear. And that is, whatever would be combining of any, what would that do, feel like?
You say, when you say, did you say combine?
Combining of a school or 2.
He's talking about the elephant in the room, I think, Jerry.
Yes, I am,
So-
I'm addressing it directly.
Because we're all talking about 5 buildings. Yeah, we've not talked about it. We've not had a chance to talk about it, really. But that's the biggest decision I think we have to make going forward. Enrollment, how many buildings do we need? Moving 6th graders to the middle school, transportation. I just can't see what we're doing until we make those decisions.
Yes, I agree with Mark on that. I think we have to know that to make this is one option, but I think we have multiple other options to look at, which is addressing all those. I don't think we're in a community that's going to see significant population gains anytime soon that we know of.
So with that in mind, are you thinking that a next work session would be less about Gibraltar and Skillman bringing information to us and more about why, I definitely want to hear from our facilities team just on
Yes.
the hours spent and money spent in all the different buildings, but are you looking at, let's have a conversation with the board about, let's hammer this out, let's
Yes.
wait, okay.
Yes, I think so, and I think there's some things that we need to get some more data within the administration that'll help us make those decisions as well.
Such as?
I mean, if you was to eliminate one school, let's say you go to 4, you got a cost savings from one school that you no longer have to maintain. That would impact all this to buy in, to doing upgrades. I mean, now those are all play factors in there. The busing comes into play. It's pretty complex, really.
Well, it's not just cost saving, it's what are our needs.
Yeah,
Both factors are important.
yeah. And I think we need that.
I think a big portion of this has to be kind of on Daryl's plate, not only for the maintenance and the like, but the logistics of getting kids to and from school and how we can do that in a more effective and efficient way so we don't have kids on buses for an hour and a half at a time. And some of that may be very difficult to do, but before we do anything, I think we have to realistically look at things from the transportation perspective, because that makes so much difference.
And you're always going to have longer bus times. That's a source of complaints, but we have 215 square miles.
Oh, yeah,
And when you look at Everton encompassing pretty much the whole southern half of our county, it's just inevitable when you run these buses out south of Orange and places, we can't fiscally handle running buses and putting 10 kids on them.
No.
And that's what we were doing when we were limited. We had some buses with 10 or 12 kids running up into Bentonville, just a couple of years ago, wasn't it, Darryl?
Yeah, we talked about even putting a 14-passenger bus up there.
Yeah, we did, putting mini buses up there even. But
The other thing is, I think that, if we had this next meeting, we all talked amongst ourselves, and you guys were all here, Skillman and Gibraltar. So if you change out all the plumbing, because it seems like plumbing is a big issue, does that mean you necessarily what do you have to do in those restrooms then? Like you said, okay, if you're only gonna tease out a part of it, let you guys know and say, okay, yeah, you don't have to redo the restrooms, but you gotta redo the plumbing, so there's gonna be some work done in those restrooms. So again, coming back to where are the greatest needs within the infrastructure, not the finishes, but rather, down deep. And yet, would we then have to do restrooms? I think we'd all love to do it all, but just looking at, what would that be then? Okay.
I think we got to keep on the side agenda here is we have lots of other things that we need to address that costs are pretty major, such as the high school pool is one thing. So if we stretch ourselves to that limit, are we going to be able to maintain and correct these other issues that we have on the side, per se? And I'm kind of looking at you, Randy, on that. 'cause
Well, and then also Scott and Randy indicated in one meeting, there are some funds for capital projects. I mean, I don't know what those dollars are that are available to us that we wouldn't necessarily need to use the bond for either. So that's another thing that could, I think, needs to be brought to the table.
Well, it can be done also two different ways. From the standpoint that, I mean, to give an idea, and Scott addressed it a little bit, our overall, I'm just gonna call it our local property tax rate. I'm not gonna talk about the money we get from the state, but I'm talking about our local property tax rate. We have about 88 cents on the dollar, or 88 cents per hundred that goes into our operations fund. In addition, we are transferring money from our educational fund into there. And then we have 30 cents, as I talked about, into debt service. Comes out to be about $1.15, I think, something, $1.15, $1.18, right net, between $1.15 and $1.20 per $100 is what we bring in. I'm saying the Fayette County Community School Corporation tax rate is, when you add those two together, we are right in the ballpark with all of our surrounding districts. Couple of them would mean on our operations, we're a little bit higher, our debt rate's a little bit lower. The net effect comes out, we're very, I'll say, competitive tax rate wise with Franklin, Rush, Wayne, Union, etc. So we're competitive there. So, part of it becomes that long term, do we take, as an example, 10 cents off of the operations and add 10 cents to the debt service that gets us, instead of that 29 million, now it becomes 38 million or whatever it becomes. None of those figures have been run so far. But does that become higher, knowing then that we're not going to have as much money for just day-to-day maintenance? It's not saying we can't take care of our buildings, but we're not maybe pumping as much into the day-to-day maintenance as what we do currently.
And there's a strategy with that. If you make all these new everything new, what are you going to do? You're going to save a lot of money on utility costs with LEDs and more efficient furnishings. So we may not need as much out of that. That's what I think Randy's getting at.
Yes.
You can shift the money to pay more, to build your debt service more.
Making those improvements should cut down on a lot of those
Which should
maintenance
help, and
costs.
it'll help maintenance costs with buying motors and pumps, and those things get really expensive when they're starting to replace those old units. So that would be a savings, I think. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think
Right,
that.
well, I'm just throwing out wild numbers, kind of. But let's say right now we're spending $200 a day to maintain the HVAC systems in our buildings because they're old. We put a new one in and we're spending $50 a day or whatever. I mean, that's the type of thing, we don't need as much maintenance if it's new. Knowing that on down the line we will need it, but we don't need it in the short term. The other factor that comes into this, and I'm just going to throw out on the table now, is looking at all of the tax, there's forms that I looked at, when you look at all of the taxing rates across the entire state of Indiana, the city of the people that live in the city of Connersville, their taxing rate is about, I believe it says 9th in the entire state of Indiana. It's over $5. I don't have it in front of me, but it's over $5. So when you look at the total rate for the city, it's extremely high. And we're part of that rate, but we're not there. I mean, when you compare that with where we're at, and yet the other taxing rates around the county, whether you're looking at the township rates, whether you're looking at the school rate, the library, all of that, I would say we're kind of mid-ground. But the actual impact and that high rate there is also what affects when we look at the circuit breaker, and we're losing $1.7 million every year to circuit breaker because we're hitting the tax caps on the 1% and those kind of things. So it's a big problem. It's more than just us.
Yeah, right.
It's also the city, the county, the library, all of those funnel into it. And that's a big figure in there.
So we could adjust those pieces when Randy does the budget, if they get approved, where we could shift more money to debt service payments, which would drive up that 29 million.
Yeah.
We're also being pressured, for good reason, to raise salaries,
Oh, yeah.
Right.
you know, which is a good, I mean.
But that's a different pot of money,
Yeah, that's our education fund.
Yeah.
and that comes from the
That was
state,
state funded.
so that's
Right.
not taxes.
You know, so what I really want to do, and I have not got there yet, is on my end of it, on the budget side, is to say, we'll throw out, you know, you guys have kind of kicked the elephant around here a little bit, but I want to run some scenarios that, to the best of our ability right now, is what happens, if we closed one building, what are we going to save? Well, off the top, you know, we've talked, that's probably one less secretary, it's probably one less principal, but it's not, you know, you don't look at seven grades, K through 6, and 2 teachers, you don't eliminate 14 teachers.
Correct.
But maybe you eliminate 1 or 2 teachers because you get the efficiencies. So it's not going to be eliminating the whole, but maybe we save there, and you know, then what happens if it's 2 buildings, 3, you know, we run all those types of scenarios to give you an idea of what are those savings to the best we can, and realize that we can run some pretty good numbers today, but it all evolves as we go along.
And
Well,
when
like, I want to say too, just for the public that's hearing this, and especially our staff, you know, when we repurposed Maplewood, when we repurposed the daycare, the Magic Moments, I mean, we did not riff anybody. Those were all through attrition, so I don't want the message to get out there, oh my gosh, people are going to lose their jobs if we ever did this. It's, you know, this is what this administration has really done an exemplary job on, is to eliminate some staffing through attrition, and has saved the corporation thousands of dollars, so.
You know, the other one, and I heard it tonight from somebody, is that the word's already out, well, we're gonna close whatever. None of that has been done, and the other thing I want to emphasize, any of these changes, I don't care if you guys voted tonight to do X, Y, or Z, we're looking an absolute minimum of 2 years, and more likely, it's probably 4 or 5 years before any of these changes would take place. There's a whole lot of discussions, but this is not there is no talk around anywhere that anything changes for when we start school in August.
Right.
We're looking a ways down the road to make these changes. It's too big to change in a short period of time.
And for the sake of time, so would you like for us to set up some times where you maybe could do a tour of the elementaries?
I would like that.
And then we could do that before the next session. And then what I'm hearing from Jeremy is Randy start running numbers on savings of maybe closing 1 building in the next few years. And
As
then
an average,
maybe looking
because
at
we don't know
4
who that
building.
building would be.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think what I could do to help would be a deeper dive into your capacity, so your student capacity in your classroom, so that you would have an idea of how much, or how many students could operate in the building comfortably.
Yes.
Because when we repurposed Maplewood, we were at a point where Maplewood's enrollment had dropped into the 240s. And we had some real extremes on class sizes, with some really low class sizes. So I believe we eliminated through attrition 11 teaching spots, a principal spot, a secretary spot, I think 1 custodial spot. It was over $1 million per year savings out of our fund, out of our education fund, that we passed back along that next year into teacher and staff salary increases. So that was strategic in why we did that, but none of those teachers or staff members lost their job. It was through people retiring or moving or whatever. So that was a really good time to repurpose that building and create a new space. So it's harder this time. We're not at that crucial point where, but as things continue in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be where, what do we do?
And that's why we're doing this now.
Right.
We're doing the planning stages. We're trying to be preventative before we get to that crisis mode.
Scott, I wish you could give us more information on if we move the 6th graders to the middle school.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I just read that, what was it, Western Wayne? One of the school corporations is just pulling sixth graders out of their middle school and putting them back in the elementary.
Really?
Because they felt that those sixth graders, I mean, what the article said, I don't know who else read it, I saw now it's back there, but the sixth graders are being exposed to too much with seventh and eighth graders. I can't remember, did that middle school didn't have ninth grade, right?
No.
It did?
I think so.
Is it Western Wayne?
It was a little high, I think.
It's all combined, and they built a sixth grade wing on years ago with the kids self-contained at the end of the building, away from the others, but they still use the gym, the cafeteria and library, so they do intermix with high school.
So having older than eighth, I can certainly understand there being a problem with that.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to consider, if we get those figures that you've asked for, that even reduces the number at elementary. I mean, that reduces our elementary.
That presents a whole nother challenge.
Yeah, that's-
Pulling up 240 or 230.
But I was looking at, how many students do we have at the middle school right now?
We're going to be about 460 next year, the way it looks.
And what would be the model number for that building?
It's 500.
600, 700?
About 550.
Part of the challenge there too is teaming. Teaming's a huge cost.
Right now, yeah.
So that would probably require.
Well,
us to
teaming's not the
eliminate teaming.
best all save all always either.
No, it's not. So
But it's
we,
nice for kids.
we could probably, we're getting to a point where our grade levels are in the low 200s. So we could probably fit.
200 sixth graders.
About 220 about next year, I think. So we could probably, it'd be close. I think we're a couple of years away from where it would be comfortable.
And logistically, the building, we could keep the sixth grade, because there's a huge difference. We have eighth graders that are 15 years old, and a sixth grader who is 11, that's
a big deal.
Yeah, that's huge.
And I think that was in the article too, that you had older upper grade kids that were older than their classmates, and then you had sixth graders, some of them 11.
11 years old,
And then
yeah,
you've got
it is.
16-year-olds in the building too, and that's.
And I'll flip that around though. You've got 12-year-old sixth graders and
With
5-year-olds, and that presents a whole nother challenge.
It's either way.
Yeah.
It's
So
either way.
it's
Yeah,
goes
there's
both ways.
Yeah.
Another thing I think would be nice to have in some of the data for us is a population density map of where the students are located in the county.
We could have Terry run that for us, and we did that with Maplewood. So Randy could have Terry run that again and show you by grade level where kids live. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting, I remember
We did
seeing
that.
that.
Yeah.
That was,
Terry did a really great job on that for us.
it was
We-
surprising.
Redistricting, didn't it?
Yeah, that's what we
Yeah,
used it
with
for.
TransFinder and some of the stuff that transportation has, we can get that. That would be good. We could put that up and share
That
that.
would just be nice to add into this whole planning.
And it really shows it showed it 4 years ago or 5, whenever we did that. You know, when you get up into the northwest corner of Fayette County, there's a handful of kids
Yeah,
up
there's
there.
like one sixth grader here, and then one, 15 miles away.
Yeah.
It feels like this.
Yeah, that's not that big.
So, yeah, we can get that for you, and Daryl can work with Terry on that. Good idea. We haven't done that for a few years.
And I wonder if we should start putting this into almost like a binder, all this data for us to retain.
Well, I was gonna ask, I took some pictures just because we
That'll be
didn't
on the
have it
website.
handout. Well, I know it'll be on the website, but I have been keeping mine in a binder at home, so I don't know if we can, maybe
Would
the
you like
next.
us to take all this information and put it in binders for each of you?
I would.
I think it would be.
I have most of it, but I've got some bits and
Cindy can work
pieces
on
that
that
are
for us.
missing.
Yeah, but even this stuff that we got today from all of you, that would be helpful to have in there
We'll have
as
that for
well.
you next.
Just so that we kind of have an idea. And I know that you guys didn't say, you didn't give specifics, you had a whole number for, I forget what facility thing it was, but 2 schools. That didn't mean that number divided in half was each. One building might have been more, depending on square footage compared to the other one. We might, as we're getting to brass tacks, need to kind of know those specifics by building, because we may think, oh, we definitely need to do it at this building, especially if we recognize that there's a lot more going on in this building. This one doesn't need quite as much, might put the money there instead of this other one. So I realize for today, it wasn't necessary to have all the details, but I think if I'm gonna look at, if I'm even gonna consider a school closing, I wanna see what those costs are, individual buildings, where it makes more bang for the buck to put our money. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? So I feel like the way you said that for the board, would it be like, I feel like what you're asking is which buildings are closer to being, which buildings need less work to continue, and which ones are more bigger lifts? There's just so much black box, the black box, there's just, like which schools just have just a big.
Yes and no, yes, that's a value, but also, plumbing, is it all the plumbing? Is it just the plumbing in certain areas? Was plumbing upgraded in one building, but it's still 30 years old? And, kind of knowing within that area, or the cooling, heating systems, they probably all have the noisy things in the classrooms, but I just imagine that some buildings have more needs than others in regard to.
That matrix bears that out.
Yeah.
So like on the maintenance issue there, where we were like saying that figure out if we're spending $200 a day or a week or whatever in maintenance on, but if $188 of that is at one particular school, that's probably something we need to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Not just that we're spending that much a day, but that this much of it is right here.
That's right.
It's sort of like, well, with this, look at all 5 schools, and we're making all 5 schools equal. That does not mean what you do to each one of them is the same.
Right.
Right.
And that's what you're.
That's what we're looking at, yes, that's what I'm
So
looking at.
is there a way for us, I wrote down, and what we'll do, Daryl, we'll dust off our old notes from the buildings, maybe circle back and have another discussion with Jimmy. And because what I think you're wanting is, can we quantify and qualify more of the operational costs, which is hours, man hours, the energy costs or savings is what you want to know on that side. And then which buildings are just bigger, more intensive than the others. And then while I'm speaking, the other thought was, it feels like the question you're asking is, because we don't always know like what you know and what you don't know when we say learning environments. Would you like to see Chris and Mike and our team show you mentioned like what is the new main office, what does it really look like? Like the next layer down, like if we're doing a main office and we're going to change it, how does that conference room, student services, social work, whatever those pieces are in the main office, how does that really look? Like what are we really getting for our money if we decide to do a main office? What are we really getting if we do STEM? And maybe even a little bit of high level, and if you do STEM, it's doing these things for learning. Would that be helpful just on some key spaces?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Because it sounds like you're going to be discerning, is it STEM, main office, library, which of those learning environment? We started the yellow, but it seems like you'd want to have the yellow explained to you a little bit more. Like what does it really mean?
Yeah.
So maybe showing the layout.
Yeah, exactly.
The design, and then showing some pictures of projects that give you an idea of what that would actually look
Similar
like.
to what we did with the facility when we showed you, here's a way to do ductwork in a room without changing the ceiling.
Right,
You do some learning environment.
Yes.
We'll do that.
So another question on LED lights. Now, are we in the process currently of switching over to LED in any buildings?
We don't have any specific plans of addressing this hallway, these classrooms. We're looking into it, but we don't have any laid out plans.
And have there been, I know not in the amount that we would ever need, that we could use, but has there been any push from the government, like grants or things since LED is more efficient and it saves energy costs, and have there been those kind of grants available?
We have done some things because we're getting, not so much, it may come through the government, but we're really getting it via the utility companies.
Okay, right. So are there, and if there's any information on that, because some of these quotes or whatever included lighting, if you did your ceiling and your lighting, and I'm just thinking, well, what if over time, again, not something we all do at once, but are there going to be these things available that we can get a building done, or so many lights over so many years? Because then, let's take advantage, obviously, of those kinds of programs.
Some of them have LED. We've started over at Little Spartans. We've got in North, we've got here, there's some in Everton. I mean, no complete building, but
We've done
other
gyms.
Little Spartans, but we've done the gyms and stuff, so.
Okay.
I think for me, I'd like to have a copy of what we saw tonight, so I can sit down with my maintenance team in the meeting and say, what do you guys see? Because, I mean, they're gonna see things that we aren't.
Yeah.
You know, and look at those numbers and see, and I mean, I think we need to look at the 3 building option. That maybe we're not running everywhere, you know, maybe we shut down this building, because now we're getting to the point where when we order a pump, it's 26 weeks if they can even get it. So, I mean, they don't make that stuff anymore, as you've told us, our stuff is really old. It's lasting, which is nice, but we're getting out of the old we can't find. So that's where we're gonna have to start.
You gotta get really good on eBay, don't you?
Yeah.
Getting something from South Dakota.
So we're gonna, oh, sorry. go ahead.
I got 2 other things. On this elementary school tours, I'm all in favor for that. But who would lead us?
Well, what I would like to do it before our principals leave for the summer, so next couple of weeks, we need to get those scheduled. So I'd like for the principal to be there, and then, of course, Daryl, and if we can get Jimmy there, we'll try to do a couple of different evenings for options. And then, of course, we would be there.
Yeah, I'd like for them to lead it and ask and highlight the needs.
Jimmy would be able to really walk us through
Most buildings,
some of
yeah,
the
really
trouble
well.
spots that
Yeah.
he and Daryl could, so.
I'm not crawling in any tunnel, I'm just telling you.
We're going to Grandview's.
We're going to the shelter.
Bomb shelter.
Bomb shelter.
That's one, and the other question would be, if in event we was to combine schools, you know, eliminate them, does certain schools favor the combining based on the property size, the ground size for the busing, the parking, all the other exterior, you know, stuff used? You know, yeah, you know, because I mean, I think of Grandview because, you know, when there was a kid, but they've got a full-size track out there, you know, they've got a lot of ground there, and I don't know how that compares, I truly don't, compared to the other schools.
So it's always easy when you can quantify something, so along with the capacity review, so that you kind of know what the student capacity is at each school, we can almost make like a checklist of the benefits of each of the sites.
Okay, so thank you.
And you can see how many boxes are checked in each of those areas.
And then you gotta look at also, you know, like that is, Fed Central's huge, I mean, but it's the water, the sewer, we gotta get
Yes.
in, we gotta subtract from what we're doing.
So that's definitely some big minuses there.
But your Challenger Faith Central has a lot of great space. And so that's the other piece of it, as big as, you know. and
You've
so-
got your 2 county schools that, I mean, I think that they serve a tremendous purpose being further out from the state.
Like it was,
That,
yeah.
you know, that they do reach, even though our population, and we'll see that map that shows where kids are, but,
And I guess another one almost, since we're really hitting hell of it hard, would there be any recommendations that you guys, that maybe we would, you know, maybe we would, we went to 2 county schools and then we had 1 big central school or something of that nature, I don't know.
That's where maintenance is a lot, talked about a lot, is what if we keep Fed Central so we're not on the bus so long? What if we keep Everton, what does that 1 big school in the middle of the town look like?
Yes.
It's
well,
going
if
to
you're
be a
talking about
lot
a new
less
school,
money.
that's,
huge money.
That would
New
have
school,
to-
or
we
you
already
have
heard, we
existing.
heard what that cost.
And that would be a 900, if we keep all the kids, K-6, we're looking at a 900 to 1,000 student school.
If it was all in one, right?
If we get, just to look at the capacity of the other 2 schools, unless we build on to Everton and possibly Faith Central there.
I mean, but those are some of the scenarios that would be nice to have that option laid out on paper.
Somebody mentioned that at the community meeting.
Yeah, at the
too.
community meeting, what if we
So-
were gonna build, what if we were gonna build a whole new building?
You know, elementary kids, we have some.
About 1,500.
But also if we were building that elementary with what Mark was talking about in 6th grade being pulled out.
That would be about 750 to 800. That's more manageable, but that's still a big building.
Yeah.
But then we
Or maybe that would even be just building on to one of the
the feasibility piece, I think, would be taking one of our current city schools, building on, and then we still have 2 elementaries to deal with there. So that would be a whole nother challenge.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
So, but they can, Chris, is that something you, Jim, could work on some ideas with that too? Is that enough info?
We're already planning it.
How's that look right now?
No, well, we're gonna have a 5-hour meeting next time, so we're gonna have to look.
All right, we got dinner coming.
I did look through everything that we have. I'll send a summary to make sure we know who's doing what, so that when we bring that back, because it looks like, Daryl, you have some work, Randy has some work, Chris has some work, Skillman has some work, Jim has some work as well, and then.
We'll get the board tour set up and work with Jimmy and Daryl on that. It's gonna be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you can
So, if you want a daytime, would that help some of you to maybe offer a daytime tour? and then
Would
evening
for
tour?
me, but I don't know about others, like
Would not
morning,
be
7:30.
Okay, I'll have Cindy start working on that with some dates. We'll get that out here in the next few days.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at some buildings and like, oh my gosh, at some others, just because of the age of the building. Like we found at, those of us that went to Loper.
We're here to cover all.
When you walk through these
Good,
buildings, you were talking about some examples. Would it be helpful to you to see an example of an office layout when you visit the
Absolutely.
buildings?
I mean, that was really helpful to see the classroom where they didn't want to take, they didn't have the money to do the
You
ceiling
can
and
see
the
what they
lights, so
have
they.
and what they really need.
Right, because that's what we're gonna end up doing, no matter what.
Okay.
Whatever the configuration is, we can't do it all. So we're gonna have to piece together, and what's most critical, address that, yeah.
Some advice also when you're touring, it's nice that when you have them kind of clustered together so that you can, if you spread them out too far, they will all kind of run together. And so seeing them within like a short time frame, also being efficient with your time and setting a schedule when we start, what are we going to see, when are we going to leave? Because just as when we visited Shelbyville, we could have stayed there another hour probably.
And in regards to technology, I know we don't have enough outlets in our classrooms. I would like to know, what are the things we really need technology-wise in our classrooms? These schools were built before there were whiteboards and computers and all that stuff. So I don't know what that looks like, except for more outlets. And is everything just outlets, or are there USB ports? Are there configurations for having these kinds of, I don't know, screens, monitors, whatever? And then the other question I had, don't we currently in our elementaries, do art and music share the same room?
Some buildings I do.
Some.
Okay. Because in that one building you showed, they had an art room that they already also used for STEM. And which I didn't know what that would look like if we utilized space we already had. But schools may already be utilizing that. When they're not having art in there, they may be using that room for something else, so I don't know. And that's, you guys
So,
will probably.
I don't want to put more on you than,
But
but will someone from Gibraltar be with us during those school tours, or?
do we need
We'll try to.
Okay. I just think it would be important if maintenance is telling us, hey, this is the problem, that someone's there to say, and this is kind of how we proposed to do that, this is where it'd come to, and this is, that sort of thing.
Yep, and glad you're gonna try to work with the principals as well, because
That's important.
they were very helpful with me when I was doing tours.
Yeah, and if the principals are there, that would be really good to hear. I mean, I know you guys surveyed everybody, and not that I don't trust that, but, I mean, just having Stephanie here and her nodding every once in a while when you guys would say something, it's like, okay, yeah, and in her mind, there might be, that's a really big issue, and something else might be, we work around it. So that would be beneficial for me if some principals were in the building to
I
help
think we gotta
us.
stay focused on plumbing too. I mean, like Scott, it's all original.
Wow.
Where does it go?
All the
We got one school.
Where does
that-
what go?
Yeah, exactly.
Very
Where do all those vapes go that get flushed down the toilet? Because they're one school, they're right in the center of the basketball court.
Are
And
you
they had to
serious?
dig it up. I think that was
That wasn't one of our schools,
No.
that was another school,
Is that I'm so ignorant, is that happening?
Yeah.
Oh, they're not gonna, no.
In our in our high school?
That wasn't ours.
That wasn't ours.
That wasn't ours,
It's something
How
you
big is a
gotta look
vape?
at.
I don't even know.
They're about that big.
Not like you.
It
Depends, they're getting more and more creative. There's one that looks like a highlighter now.
Yep,
USB, little
USBs,
drives.
there's all kinds.
Yeah, we can't solve all.
You can't solve that. We're not gonna solve that one, trust me.
Okay, all right, thank you.
This was helpful for us
Yeah.
to give us some direction going
Yeah.
forward, and I know for you guys too. So we'll work on getting these meetings scheduled soon. So.
Any other information anybody needs to raise? I'd like to seek a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Chris, do I hear a second? Thanks, Mark, all in favor, signify by raising your hand, opposed, same sign.
Better.